Now that's significant. The Market Research Podcast.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us on this latest episode of Now That's Significant, a market research podcast. This is your host, Michael Howard, the head of marketing at Infotools. Today we're joined by Rob Volpe, CEO, Chief Catalyst and Empathy Activist at Ignite 360. Rob is also the author of a very interesting book, Tell Me More About That, Solving the Empathy Crisis One Conversation at a Time. Thanks for joining us on the show, Rob.
Michael, thank you. It's so great to be here. So excited for our conversation.
Yes, so what is the most significant thing you're going to tell us today?
We are going to dive into the dangers of empathy. There's a lot of talk right now about the importance of being empathetic, but there's always another side to that. And so we're going to dive into what that is, where that line might be, and what not to step over.
Nice, and I'm sure that would apply to both brands and people at the same time.
Absolutely, always.
Yes. So it's not something that you hear every day, being too much empathy. I mean, it is a human trait, yet it's something that consumers now expect of brands and society. I'm really keen to hear about your thoughts on brands and empathy. So is there a difference when it comes to empathy when, say, comparing a human and a personified brand?
Yes and no. I mean, so if you think about empathy as connecting with another person to understand through understanding and showing that person that you understand who they are, where they're coming from, what they might be feeling, that largely encompasses the kind of definition of empathy. There's a lot of different pieces to that, though. There's cognitive empathy, which is the perspective taking, and then emotional empathy, which is that feeling the feelings of somebody else. Those hold true. I mean, people are looking for empathy from brands. They're expecting it. I think Ipsos and Pepsi did a study a few years ago, and 86%, I think it was, of consumers said that if their brand is empathetic towards them, they're going to be more loyal. And about 90% are expecting brands to show empathy, not just through their talk, but through their actions as well. So brands are in this interesting place right now where, you and I can have a dialogue and talk and get to know one another and really understand where we're coming from, and maybe have empathy with each other. What brands need to do is, I think, find the touch points where they can interact and be more empathetic. So I think about social media. I think about some of the brands that have been really active on Twitter and replying back to their fans or users that are interacting with them, your customer service, call centers, things like that. And then there's also the broader like messaging and how your brand is actually showing up in the world today.
So you have to be empathetic, not just appear to be empathetic. It's a nuance, but
it is. Performative anything is not going to, but performative empathy is not going to fly. People are looking for authenticity. They're looking for that genuine, like, okay, yeah, they really do get me. They understand where I'm coming from. And it all boils down to people. They want to be seen, they want to be heard, and brands have a role in helping people feel that way. Sometimes it's by reflecting that back. So representation in marketing campaigns, or understanding, the pain points, the needs, the wants that a consumer or user might have, and infusing that in your product development and your design methods, that helps a consumer feel seen and heard as well.
I'm just thinking about marketing speak, personas. And so back in the day, you used to have your personas out there, and that was basically a picture of one type of person who was your key target market. That's not really empathetic, is it, when you think about the one to many?
Not anymore. And that is the challenge too. Brands have to understand that you know, yes, with customer service, yes, somewhat with the social media engagements, you're having that one-to-one sort of interaction, and understand that you've got that there. And then you're having one-to-many. And what's happened over the years now, and with the advent of all the digital platforms, there's so much more tailored, targeted messaging that's going out, that it's still one-to-many, but it's not as many. So it's a little more niche and focused. And then that's definitely your opportunity to really show up and help your consumers understand, like, yes, I do get you. Whereas I had another thought and it just escaped me. It'll come back.
It's so good. It is a fascinating space for technology to play in, to help deliver that there. So what are some of the ways that that brands can be too empathetic?
You know, one of the big dangers with empathy in general, and if you think of a highly empathetic person, also known as maybe a highly sensitive person, we've all met the person that maybe wears their heart on their sleeve, or that, you know, cares too much. And empathy in business is one more data point that you need to be considering. So you've got the business metrics, and then you've got whatever your customer, your buyer is saying, you know, and then you've got your consumer, and you need to have empathy in different places, but you still have to understand also what your shareholders or your stakeholders are considering and thinking about. And so ideally, empathy is showing up in balance, where it's one more data point that you're considering. If you're too empathetic, you're going to be out of balance, and that's a danger that leaders actually have and express to me and other empathy practitioners, is that if I'm empathetic, am I going to lose respect? Are my employees going to walk all over me? Are they going to take advantage of me? And yeah, if you put empathy first, you may end up really helping them feel supported and do what they want, but you're not necessarily going to do what's in the best interest of the business. And so in today's world, that's the new juggling act for balancing that managers and leaders need to achieve is, hey, how am I going to communicate this decision to my employees, my team, in a way that's going to help them feel seen and heard? I understand you want to work from home. However, we need to return to the office for XYZ reason, and we're going to do this as a compromise. Or, you know, the ways that you can communicate information, but you still have to manage what's best for the business. As a brand, you know, play that out to how you're showing up in the world. If you're too overly empathetic, I mean, you would potentially make bad business decisions for your brand. You know, I've not seen a brand do this yet, but maybe they're giving it away. Maybe they're not charging enough because, we've got a lower income consumer. But if you're not respecting your business metrics, then you're not going to end up making money, which means you're not going to be around, which means you're not really truly being of help to your consumer. I think there's also the sort of attempts to be empathetic and a desire to do that, but you're leaning too far into it. And it actually then ends up becoming, it rings a false bell. And you can also, you know, again, get kind of performative, or you're excluding one group and because you're paying attention to another. And before we got started, we were talking about Bud Light here in the US. And so, you know, we're recording this in mid-April, and there's a controversy going on in the United States where Bud Light has partnered with a content creator called Dylan Mulvaney, as a trans woman who just ran a program, and she's got like 6 or 7 million followers, I think, on TikTok. So she's a real, like, legit presence, and avid followers. And Bud Light got into a collaboration campaign with her, and then that alienated Bud Light's followers on the right, or some of them at least, represented by Kid Rock, who is, taking a shotgun against cases of Bud Light out in his backyard, because in protest, and I'm, forsaking ever drinking a Bud Light again. I think that is actually genuine, compared to, I think about what the stunt that M&M's pulled for the Super Bowl, where they took away the spokes characters and replaced it with Maya Rudolph, and that was not empathetic, and I don't think was done particularly well. But there's a danger. So when you're I don't want to say over identifying. I don't want to come across faulting what Bud Light's done. I have a lot of respect for it. And I think it was the right thing to do, because they're focused on the next generation of potential drinkers for them. But you've got to balance out, when you are a mass brand like Bud Light, you do have to be aware of how things are playing with your different constituents, and how, what are the messages going to the different sort of audiences, so that you're empathizing with them as well. And what, I guess the question is, like, what is the message from Dylan Mulvaney that they're emphasizing, which is about being true to yourself? That resonates with everybody. Being authentic, being real, being your true self. That ultimately, whether regardless of the end of the political spectrum, your gender identity, whatever the difference you might have, being yourself is what we want.
Yeah. Yeah, nice. Well, not nice what has gone down, but some good points. So when we think about potential outcomes of brands being overly empathetic, are there differences across the ways you've just outlined?
I think the other one that I usually talk about for empathy failures, and I think I did not work on this campaign, but I always point to the Pepsi commercial with, I think it was Kendall Jenner, back during the George Floyd Black Lives Matter protests in the summer of 2020. And I think there was good intention that was behind it, but the idea of having a white woman come forward with a Pepsi and, come out of this group of multicultural, very diverse protesters, and then go to the police and give them a Pepsi, and suddenly that creates world peace. It rang really false. I think they had the intention of trying to be empathetic and bring people together. And I think when I say be empathetic in that situation, it's trying to understand. I think there's a message of, we're all in this together. How do we, come together, get along, and a Pepsi can help facilitate that. The execution of that campaign was pretty broadly criticized, and I think it got pulled pretty quickly. And it was also, I think, not in an attempt to be empathetic with a broader message. It was not empathetic with the people going through the struggle itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the dangers are that you're going to overstep, and you're going to alienate some of your audience. You could kind of give it all away, and I think make bad decisions that are not going to be great for your brand.
So do you think people would appreciate the gesture, or would you be better not to do anything in that situation?
I think people need to call me before they make the gesture. We'll guide them through that. But I'm happy to talk to anybody. But seriously, I think it's what's necessary. It's how we're wired as humans, is to be empathetic. But there is this lack of understanding of empathy and this fear of empathy that, people will get into these situations where they think they're being empathetic, but they're really not, or they just don't understand what to say. And sometimes being empathetic is not saying anything. It's, giving somebody a hug or just nodding along or shedding a tear.
Mm.
But you have to understand empathy and the power of empathy in order to harness it in a constructive way. Whether you're a brand leader or a business leader or, just an everyday leader of your household.
Yeah. So if we were to reverse this, which is far more common, what happens when brands have absolutely no empathy at all? Which I guess raises an equally valid question: do brands need to be empathetic at all?
I mean, it's interesting. I think about brands that, and I would invite anybody listening, think about the brands that you feel really get you, that are your kind of badges, or that they connect with you. That's empathy. That's them understanding. It's that classic conversation about Apple, and Steve Jobs like intuitively understood what people needed, and understanding what people need is empathy. It's understanding their perspective, their point of view. He understood with the iPhone that kind of beautiful, sleek design speaks to people, and that's who they went after, and they said, this is our target, and let's go for it. Brands that don't take the time to really understand the point of view of their consumers are going to have a much harder time in the market. Yeah. So, it's kind of the, let's look at the, long list of failed products and things that are out there. I mean, if you think about things that have not worked in the marketplace, I guess we could go all the way back to New Coke as one example, where they didn't fully understand what it was that their consumers loved about their product. And yeah, in a blind taste test, Pepsi was outperforming it, but there was something magical about Coke that they didn't really fully appreciate. And I think too often marketers want to be, marketers don't want to disappoint. So they want to be all things to all people. If you look at retail and what's happening in retail right now, I remember 20 years ago, I was in a very different role, and we were doing a partnership with Gap and Gap Kids. And I was working at a toy company, and we were doing, it was called the Hoodie-O, which was this radio sewn into a hoodie fleece. It was very early wearable tech. And I remember being in conversations with some of the buyers at Gap as we were working through the program, and somebody said to us like, "Oh, we don't want to we want to have enough. We don't want to disappoint our consumers. We don't want them to come in and not have enough." And I think this is an example of being overly empathetic, or being empathetic with one aspect of it, but not the broader aspect of the business. So in that particular case, they had, so you produce things, well, it ends up all getting marked down. Your consumer gets trained that, hey, I can buy this on sale and I don't need to rush out and get it. Well, you haven't disappointed the consumer, but you've really hurt your bottom line. Because and your top line, because your sales just aren't going to be there because people are waiting to buy this at this lower price. Yep. You've seen that. I mean, one of the problems Kohl's has been dealing with was that they had too much inventory. They were carrying way too much product in their stores, and it wasn't moving fast enough. And so but again, they didn't want to disappoint their consumers. So they had the right intention. They had empathy with one data point of the consumer experience, but without necessarily, they let that outweigh the other sorts of elements to it, the sort of cachet of having something that not everybody else has, the sense of urgency and the delight that can come where, oh, hey, I got the latest piece from the latest collection. That makes me feel that way. So empathy, too much empathy in one place can be dangerous in those ways, and can lead to then, poor sales results, like all the pain, all the things that are going on.
So I should just clarify that follow-up question, which I stated, do all brands need to be empathetic, or is there a case for some that don't need to?
Going through my mental encyclopedia of every brand in existence, well, I would say this: every business is a brand or has brands within it, whether you're B2B or B2C. And anytime you're making something, or there is something that somebody's going to buy, if there's a transaction, there is a role for empathy, and there's a need for empathy. So yes, every brand should be empathetic and understand how empathy shows up, whether it's in their sales organization, their marketing organization, product design, accounting, finance, like all the different functions.
I guess it's a purely hypothetical, but if there was a brand that had no competitor, I'd argue it wouldn't necessarily need to be empathetic. But as soon as you have a choice between brand A or B, then the empathetic brand is going to win over.
Well, yeah, that's going to be a brand that's going to have a competitor probably pretty quickly, because that brand is not going to have a great reputation in the market.
True.
And people are going to clamor for, oh, there's something else that's available.
Yeah.
I mean, look at Twitter and what's going on with Twitter right now. Like, I was just reading an article, was it the New York Times or the Washington Post in the last couple of days, about, I think it was the Washington Post, looking at, okay, so it's been a year since Elon Musk announced he was going to buy Twitter, and it's been about 6 months or so since that deal actually closed. And what's actually going on? Well, there's an 80% reduction in workforce. There's about an 85% reduction in advertising sales, although he claims that it's coming back up. And now, because of some of the things that they're doing, they're turning off their user base. And there's just tons of stories in the media about how unempathetic he's been towards his employees. And it's really just, it's really sad, honestly, because these are some of them. One of our neighbors was a former senior engineer and had 10 years at the company. And he was planning to leave before the acquisition took place. But yeah, I've heard plenty of stories from him about the way the employees have been treated or talked to, the expectation, and that's not what that organization used to be. And so Twitter is, the bloom is off the rose, I think is the expression, with Twitter. And now the question is, well, who's going to come in and take its place as that kind of public square or place where people go for instant news? So that's the situation, or living proof of unempathetic leadership isn't going to get you terribly, I can't say terribly far, because Elon Musk is quite successful and wealthy, and that is a metric for many people. But Twitter is kind of circling the drain, it seems, at this point. So it remains to be seen what happens.
You hear a number of people say, if you can be empathetic and employee first, in your mindsets, then they're the ones that are looking after your customers and your clients, etc. So there's a flow-on effect there.
We are social creatures just by nature. That's humans. We would hunt in packs if we were at that place. Like, we are social by nature, and so relationships become so critical in all elements in the sales relationship, within research. Like, how many clients take their research vendors with them when they go from job to job, because they trust them. They know that they're going to do the job for them. They've got the personal connection that's built. And empathy is a large part of that.
So empathy is it seems to be severely lacking in the world right now. Do you know of any studies that prove we are actually becoming less empathetic, or are those who aren't just getting more spotlight on the news and social media?
Do I know of studies that prove that we're losing our empathy? Some interesting stuff. And one of the things that really got me going 13 years ago now, a study came out from the University of Michigan, where they looked at student life surveys from 1979 through 2009 of 76 different universities. So there were hundreds of responses, if not thousands of responses, I would imagine, that they were looking at. And they tracked the level of response to the question, can you easily see the point of view of your classmates? And what they found was from 1979 through 2001, there was a 40% decline. And then that data stayed at that subdued or suppressed level for the last 8 years of the study. And now, so, okay, 40% decline, you were in college in 2001. That means today in 2023, you're in your early 40s, late 30s, early 40s. Oh my gosh, you're a member of your community, a neighbor, maybe a parent or a partner, spouse to somebody, you're working, you may have managerial responsibilities, leadership, and you don't have as much empathy as other people. That's a big problem. Mm-hmm. So when I heard that was just alarming. We've seen at Ignite 360, we took that exact same question and put it out to adults in our Navigating to a New Normal study. And the thing we've seen, the highest number we've seen so far is about 31%, so almost a third of US adults are unable to easily see the point of view of other people. Mm-hmm. And this is, to me, it's kind of like, being in research, I'm like, this is not the best research question. Because if I ask you, are you able to easily see the point of view of other people? You kind of get a clue, I probably should answer yes, or, they're going to think I'm a sociopath. So even though it's at 31%, couldn't agree, so they were neutral or disagreed with that. That number is probably a little higher. It has dropped. I think the last time we surveyed it in the fall, it was at about 27%. So there's a little bit of decline down, which is awesome. Mm-hmm. Because I think there is more awareness of, hey, I do need to get a grip on my empathy skills and figure out how to do this thing. So that's happening. But at the same time, also in the fall, we asked in this 1,500 US adults, we gave them a list of, I think it's 24 different issues, topics, personal finance things to global societal issues, and asked how concerned they were about them. The top 3 were personal pocketbook issues. So rising food prices, gas prices or gasoline, petrol prices, and then home energy prices. Food prices was number 1 at 71%. I think the third one was energy prices at 63%. At 62%, so top 2 box, 62% of people were worried about our inability to overcome our differences of opinion. Mm-hmm. So that came ahead of, and then the next one immediately after that, at I think 60%, was the political polarization in government. And again, these are all US respondents, but I think, you don't have to look too hard to see how that's playing out elsewhere as well. So polarization in government, inability to get along, inability to overcome differences of opinion were 4 and 5 of the top 5 of these 24, ahead of climate change, women's reproductive rights, equality, discrimination, access to healthcare, income inequality, all these other big issues. So it's our ability to solve these issues is eclipsing the worry about the issues itself. And that's not good. And that's the state of where things are right now.
So I guess that's a great segue into your book now. Tell me more about that, which revolves around the 5 steps to empathy. So how can brands become more empathetic?
So it's really about this is an exercise individually before a brand can come together and do this collectively.
Yeah.
So individually, the 5 steps are: dismantle your judgment, ask good questions, actively listen, integrate into understanding, and use solution imagination. And these are all the things you need to be doing in the moment when you're interacting with somebody. And having that self-awareness of how you're showing up, and judgment, biggest thing, biggest challenge of all the steps for people to actually do anything about, because we're kind of wired to carry judgment around with us. And it's not about making a judgment like, oh, what color shirt am I going to wear today? But it's about being judgmental. So casting aspersion on somebody else because of the color of shirt that they wore, or they don't like whatever the thing is. You got to overcome all of that. You've got to be asking the right questions. You've got to be listening. You've got to make room in your head. Understand that it's, everybody has a different way of viewing the world, and we need to be curious about it. We need to take a curious breath and ask more questions and try to understand. And then finally, using solution imagination. And that's where you are taking things and turning it around and starting to use it to inform and fuel the conversation to get it to a positive outcome, whether you're trying to ideate or solve a problem together, or collaborate on a situation, to compromise, to build trust, to reach forgiveness, just even to communicate. You need empathy. Empathy fuels all of those different skills. So imagine as your team is kind of going through, and I do empathy trainings with different clients and organizations. So I typically walk them through, I demystify empathy, because there is a lot of confusion about what it is and what it isn't, and all of the data that's coming out there. So I try to clarify all of that, and then I go through the 5 steps, and then we start to really workshop and talk about how those things show up. And then as a brand, you need to start really looking at how you start to apply that as a group, as an organization. Are there existing biases in your organization or stereotypes that might be forming judgment? Are you actually listening? You talked about the persona earlier, and that image that would show up, and, oh, here's Tracy, and she's 35, and she lives in the suburbs, likes to do yoga, and drinks red wine at night. Well, it just named a lot of people. So you got to go a layer deeper to really, and that's where the transformative insight even lies. So it's understanding that, hey, we've got to stop living up at the surface. We've got to go down deeper and explore and understand, and then figure out, what does this mean? How do we do it? But not to be judgmental about it, not to dismiss it automatically because you don't like the way somebody looks, or maybe they reveal that, oh, I was in a focus group before. And I've had some clients go, oh my God, they're a professional respondent, they should get out. Or how many surveys have they taken? That stuff happens, and it doesn't invalidate their opinion in this particular moment on this particular topic, and we should listen to that. Or I remember one, I always come back to this story from like 10 or 12 years ago, back when Greek yogurt really exploded here in the United States. Fage and Chobani took over and just clobbered the traditional yogurt brands. And it led to a lot of pain for those organizations, and layoffs and lost revenue and everything. One of those manufacturers hired us to find out, like, why are people eating Greek yogurt? What's that all about? And we went out, did some in-home ethnographies, and got a lot of really great data, shared all of that. And the business director, so the senior business leader that we were involved with, was like, I still don't understand why people want to pay more than $1 for a cup of yogurt, because our yogurt costs 55 cents. So why not just buy that? And it was like, okay, but like we just explained all of these different things and how all of that's coming together. That was the challenge. He was locked in some judgment about just the fact that why wouldn't somebody want the cheaper yogurt, not recognizing, well, no, Greek yogurt is like a totally different thing, and it's on trend with all the health and food trends that are going on, where it had a more simple ingredient deck. It was like white yogurt. It wasn't colored like cotton candy, like so many yogurts were at the time. A lot of different things were different about it. And that's an example of letting your judgment get in the way. If they had been open, I can't say that if they'd been open, that would have saved the business, but by being more open to hearing what your consumers have to say and not being judgmental about it and integrating that into your understanding. And then it's like, okay, step into their shoes, do something about it. There's exercises and activities that people can do to practice their empathy with their consumer and, live a week in the life of your consumer. That stuff is so powerful, because so often businesses, especially businesses that are beyond kind of startup or smaller sizes, brands tend not to be populated with employees that are the consumer. They tend to be somebody else, and we're looking for, the educated, six-figure salary, whatever. So as a result, if you're not your consumer, you've got work to do just to try to be your consumer. And that's about having empathy and understanding where they're really coming from, so that you ultimately can strengthen your intuition, so that you're making decisions reflecting what your consumer really wants, because you understand who they are. And every brand should be going through that every kind of 3 years probably is a good cycle, because of the way things shift and change.
And it's one of the key roles that market research plays in an organization, isn't it? To understand the consumer and then how their attitudes, their behaviors, opinions, etc., have shifted over time. So
anybody in marketing research is like, I talk about it, it's like there's a special sort of jujitsu that you have to practice as a market researcher when it comes to empathy, because not only do you have to have empathy with the consumer and what they're going through, you also have to have empathy with your stakeholder, your marketing manager or whomever, and you have to help them have empathy, or the marketing manager have empathy with the consumer as well, and overcome their barriers and the things that are getting in their way. So you really have to understand empathy and how to utilize those tools, how to utilize the 5 steps in order to get them to that place and help them overcome their judgment, and be able to, first you got to be able to recognize, oh, they're being judgmental about this, or they're not really actively listening, or there's something going on where they're having trouble integrating into understanding, because they've got it stuck in their head that people should spend 55 cents for a cup of yogurt.
I really think that the good old-fashioned debate has lost its place in society, and we really should bring it back. And even for those of us that are on one side of a particular position, those on the other, swap places and then try and convince each other. There's some things that we could learn from that, walking in other people's shoes.
Absolutely. And as long as you treat topics and people with respect, there's quite a lot that we can learn.
Yeah, true. So if we're tying this back to our theme of the podcast today, how can brands ensure that they aren't overly empathetic, that they get strike that right balance?
How can brands ensure? I think you need to do kind of an empathy audit, and look at and pick the area, but is it your comms? Is it your product? How and what, have an honest conversation. What is the role of the consumer, empathy with the consumer that's playing, and how is that balanced with the business needs and the business situation? So, there may be, if we had a pie chart, a third, a third, a third of, empathy with the consumer, business need, challenge, and maybe if I'm a packaged foods, like, customer considerations or something like that. And then within business is all the manufacturing and the financial pieces of that. So really important for brands to have honest conversations internally with themselves, to ask their agency partners, how are we doing? And it's an uncomfortable conversation maybe to have. And also pay attention, like, if you're not getting engagement on social media, it might, there's probably something that's not happening right, and how do you then create a culture of empathetic understanding and connection? We have one client in financial services, and they help people out with debt relief. And it's really amazing. You go walk in their offices, and on many of the office windows or doors, they've got testimonials from, like, in the actual email or letter from their customers about how they helped them out during this time of financial difficulty. And not just like, oh yeah, you wrote a check and made my problems go away, but no, I felt really supported. You heard me, you helped me out. And that builds loyalty. So, as we were saying at the very beginning, the top of the show, you're building loyalty with your consumers. So, they may be open to other products or services that you have to offer. But it's so important to be building that culture and to be doing an honest assessment.
Yeah, very cool. So if I can recap what we've talked about today, so the dangers of too much empathy in market research. So empathy is obviously something that's a human trait, and it's all about being able to see other people's perspectives, respecting them, and then be able to live in harmony. You may have a difference of opinion, but that's okay, and we should be able to coexist with one another. We know that brands, it's expected of them to be empathetic with customers. You used to have the one-to-many approach, but often now we're expecting as consumers to have a one-on-one. It's not always going to be perfect. We kind of get that, but we need to be listened to, felt we're heard, and that brand is being able to deliver things for me as an individual. We have talked about some of the ways that brands can be too empathetic, and that can mean losing sight of your business objective. You could alienate other parts of your audience, or yes, there could be some analytical data or thinking which is kind of pushed aside in response to being able to wear your heart on the sleeve, per se. So it can mean also that we potentially don't make some right business decisions, but it might be right for the person. And I guess that's a really difficult challenge for businesses as well. So what is the thing to do in those circumstances? We also had a look at is the world becoming more empathetic or less? We have been seeing some studies where it is actually becoming more empathetic, which is encouraging. So hopefully that trend can continue. And then we also had Rob talk about the 5 steps to empathy from his book, Tell Me More About That. So spoke of dismantling judgment, asking good questions, actively listening, integrating into understanding, and using solution imagination as well. So trying to see things from other people's perspectives. And we also covered a few points on how brands can ensure they aren't being overly empathetic as well. So I think that covers it, Rob. Any final words you wanted to add?
A+. I'm very impressed. No, I think that was a great recap. and I think it goes to illustrate there is a lot around empathy, and it's very multifaceted and can be easily confused. But if I can leave people with one thought beyond, please check out the book and follow me on the socials. There's a quote from Maya Angelou that I always reference. And she had said, I believe we all have empathy. We may not have the courage to display it. Mm-hmm. And so I always encourage people and challenge people to be courageous. And, we're not talking about go run into a burning building courage. We're talking about small acts of courage, those tiny moments where you have a choice, and to make the choice to be empathetic and try to be there.
That's a great final word. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today, Rob.
Michael, thank you so much. It's really been a lovely conversation. I've enjoyed it.
You're welcome. And for the listeners out there, thank you too for tuning in. If you have liked what you've heard today, feel free to check out Rob. Will add some links in the show notes, so be sure to check those out. Otherwise, feel free to subscribe to the podcast, leave a review, or even share this with someone that you know who might find this talk on empathy as interesting and exciting as we have. So thank you so much for listening to Now That's Significant.